This is not the society that I grew up in. The war is here. It's on our doorstep with 72% of Americans overweight, 42% obese, 24% have planned to kill themselves, 13% have tried to kill themselves. I believe we are on the front edge of a tidal wave of mental health problems in children and young adults.
I will not be controlled by a chemical. I'll be honest, doctor, that was probably the story of my life for the past 30 years. I was controlled by various chemicals. Started off with alcohol, drugs like heroin. My successes later in life were slowly getting off each one of those substances.
If you constantly dump dopamine, you're going to be sad. You're going to be unmotivated. You won't be able to focus.
I think it was psychiatrists or psychologists, the only medical professionals that don't look at the organ they're treating.
Well, and they call me crazy.
I'm sure.
How do you know unless you look?
So we have more obesity, more mental disorders, and this is all going one way, which is the wrong way.
85% of psychiatric drugs are prescribed by non-psychiatric healthcare professionals in 10-minute office visits. So if you just start with that, you realize this is going to be trouble. What we know is that purposeful people live longer, they're healthier, and they're happier. So I don't start with you're bipolar, you're schizophrenic, you have OCD. I generally start with you're awesome. How much more awesome can I help you be?
The world is changing. Inspiration is everywhere. It has never been so easy to connect, share, and bring people together. We're learning from others and finding the best in ourselves. Challenging our beliefs. Sharing our vulnerability. Overcoming our fears. Transforming ourselves so we can transform the world. How far can we go?
This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is... This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is Dr. Daniel Amen, the physician, psychiatrist, and brain disorder specialist. You are considered one of the most influential experts in the world when it comes to brain health, with over 40 years of clinical practice and over 300 million views of your videos online. You've written 12 New York Times bestselling books, including Change Your Brain, Change Your Life, and The End of Mental Illness. Your expertise has been sought by major institutions, including Google, Harvard, the National Security Agency, and the U.S. Congress. Your latest book, Change Your Brain Every Day, breaks down the importance of looking after your brain and how it plays such a crucial role in your overall well-being. Your goal is simple, to change the way psychiatric medicine is treated and practiced worldwide. Dr. Amen, welcome to London Real.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you for helping me share this message.
I am looking forward to diving into this because you have unique IP and an incredible way of looking at the brain and the world. I wanted to throw a few quotes for people out there from you. You have said, quote, "The war for your health is won or lost between your ears. Make no mistake, you're in a war for the health of your brain and mind. Everywhere you go, someone is trying to make money by shoving bad food down your throat that will kill you early." You continue by saying news corporations repeatedly pour fear and images of disaster into your brain to boost their ratings. Tech companies create addictive gadgets that hook your attention and distract you from your loved ones and your purpose. Talk to me about this war we all have going on, this information war that determines our brain health, our longevity, our happiness, everything.
So last night, I adopted my two nieces because both of their parents were drug addicts and bad parents. And it was just horrifying to watch as they got taken into foster care. Well, last night I went to the Orange County Department of Education because one of my nieces got a character award and she got a scholarship for a full ride to UCLA. So I'm so proud of her.
Wow.
And I was watching all of the teachers and the kids. It was the most unhealthy group. And I live in Orange County, California, which is sort of known as a healthier part of California. And I was just horrified about the incidence of obesity. And I'm like, this is not the society that I grew up in. And the war is here. It's on our doorstep with 72% of Americans overweight, 42% obese. It's dramatically spiked in children. And then if you mix that with the social media addiction, I don't know if you saw this study, Brian, 57% of teenage girls are persistently sad. More than half of teenage girls are persistently sad. 24% have planned to kill themselves. 13% have tried to kill themselves. I believe we are on the front edge of a tidal wave of mental health problems in children and young adults. And I'm just horrified because everywhere you look, you see our society has it out for them rather than nurturing them. And so we're in an era of anger and confusion, division, and terrible food and toxic products we're putting on people's bodies. And so, as a neuroscientist and a psychiatrist, as I step back, I'm just constantly horrified by what is happening in our society.
I'm turning 52 today, and I grew up kind of in the 80s, and it was before mobile phones, maybe before extreme food engineering, and maybe before some of the things that brought us to where we are today. Is it a lot of those things? Because we weren't necessarily there back in the 80s or even the 90s, were we?
Not even close. Not even close. It would have been very rare for you to have a friend or someone in your high school commit suicide. It is very common for that to take place now. I see children all the time that are just devastated that one of their friend attempted or completed suicide. And it's all of these factors that are coming together. And then if you add the pandemic and our reaction to the pandemic, the fear, the isolation, forced vaccinations, people losing a sense of autonomy and control over their own bodies. And then the virus itself, which caused an inflammatory bomb in the brain, you just see how things are accelerating in a bad way. And then, not to mention, of course, alcohol is a health food in the mind of so many people. Marijuana is innocuous. It's completely a lie. But the big innovations in psychiatry now are marijuana, ketamine, and psilocybin. It's like the street drugs of the 60s are making a comeback. And I'm like, why don't we feed people right and teach them not to believe every stupid thing they think and teach them to love and honor their brains?
Yeah, there's a lot of things you just spoke about, and I'd love to get into every single one of them. I'll just say, on a personal note, there's a quote from you that really resonated with me, and maybe we'll go there first. And I think you wrote one time, "I will not be controlled by a chemical," or at least maybe that was a thesis of a lot of what you were writing. And I'll be honest, doctor, that was probably the story of my life for the past 30 years, is that I was controlled by various chemicals. Started off with alcohol, and then when I went to New York City, I moved on to drugs like heroin. I had a nice overdose that woke me up in '01. I was smoking Lucky Strikes back in the day. And my successes later in life were slowly getting off each one of those substances, because each one would whittle away my self-esteem every single day that I knew I had to grab it, whether it was consciously or subconsciously. And honestly, those are some of the greatest successes of my life, more than my family, more than everything I created here, was the fact that I will not be controlled by a chemical. And I was just wondering if you could just talk a little bit about that, because like you said, these days, it feels like we're being offered more and more chemicals. And it seems to be kind of going the other way. And I'm just curious for your thoughts on that.
Well, we're being thrilled to death. And there's a very interesting part of the brain called the nucleus accumbens. It's where dopamine works. If you like push on it a little bit, you feel happy. And our society is pushing on it so much that it's actually wearing it out. And so if you think of heroin or cocaine or alcohol or marijuana, they all release dopamine that gives you that sort of sense of euphoria or high, or, it's a drive to do it again. Gadgets do it. Pornography does it. Gossiping does it. Schadenfreude, what's the name? It's like being happy about the failures of others is another thing that we see all the time. You're in England, the Daily Mail is famous for it. Yeah. Let's get a headline that just diminishes someone. And they've covered my work actually fairly, so I don't want to pick on them too much. But we're taking our pleasure centers and we just keep dumping dopamine, and it hooks you. And I don't want to be controlled by a substance, and I don't want to be controlled by a news organization. I don't want to be controlled by Apple or Facebook, for goodness sakes. But you have to be very intentional, because if you constantly dump dopamine, you're going to be sad. You're going to be unmotivated. You won't be able to focus. It's one of the reasons the spike in ADD or attention deficit disorder has occurred. It's a dopamine deficit disorder. I've been blessed to treat a number of very well-known people. It's public knowledge that I've treated Justin Bieber and Miley Cyrus, and fame completely wears out the pleasure centers in the brain. I mean, fame is potentially lethal.
Why is that? Why is fame?
Because when you become famous, everybody recognizes you, and like that's so exciting. It's so exciting, but there's this thing called hedonic adaptation that, once, you get pleasure from somebody recognizing you, you then need more and more of it to have the same response, just like with your drug abuse, right? The first time you did cocaine, you're like, whoa, I like that. And the second time was good, but not as good as the first time. And by the 20th time, you're not using for the euphoria, you're using to treat the subsequent depression from the depletion of dopamine. And so if you think of fame and, and I love both of them so much, but you wear out the pleasure centers, pretty soon you're using a cocktail of drugs just to try to feel okay. And, they almost killed those children. Early fame is particularly bad because your brain really isn't done developing until you're about 25 or 26. And so having early fame at 14, 15, potentially devastating for brain function.
Wow. I'm just curious, while we're on that, how do you start off with someone like Justin Bieber that probably got famous in his teens? I think it was mid-teens maybe, or Bella Hadid, or even Miley Cyrus was young as well, wasn't she, when she got famous? What is your philosophy around something like that?
Well, the first thing is bonding, getting them to trust me, and then getting them to love their brain. I remember when Justin came into my office, and like many celebrities come, he'd not come, he'd do what I said, mostly not. And then when he went through a really hard season, he came into my office and he said, I think I understand what you're trying to tell me. My brain is an organ, just like my heart is an organ. If you told me I had heart problems, I'd do everything you said. I'm going to do everything you say. And before he came to see me, he'd been diagnosed by somebody else with bipolar disorder. But at Amen Clinics, I have 11 clinics around the United States. We look at the brain. I mean, we looked at his brain with a study called Brain SPECT, SPECT, imaging that looks at blood flow and activity. And I'm like, you don't have bipolar disorder. Your brain's hurt. We need to find out why it's hurt. And he's just done remarkably well. Or Miley, it was getting her to love her brain. And, she has the #1 song in the world right now, Flowers. I'm so proud of her. And Flowers is really about self-love. And when you love yourself, right, doing the right thing for your brain is an act of love. It's an act of love for yourself, for your family, for your friends, and for your mission. Why are you on the planet? When your brain works right, you work right. And too many people have the idea, if I really take care of my brain, I'm going to miss out. It's like, well, how can you have any fun? I have a high school course that teaches young people how to love their brains called Brain Thrive by 25. And invariably, one of the 14-year-old boys will raise his hand and go, how can you have any fun? And so we play a game with them. And I played this with Miley as well. It's like, okay, who has more fun? The kid with the good brain or the kid with the bad brain? In fact, I was doing a big lecture for high school students. And I texted Miley right before the lecture. And I said, are you having more fun with your good habits or your bad ones? And she texted me back. She goes, good, by 1 billion. And I think if you asked her now, from relationships and productivity and happiness, it's with her good habits.
Yeah, amen to that. I can attest to that. I mean, I'm about 5.5 years since I stopped drinking, and people ask me about it, I get a big old smile on my face, and I'm like, oh my God, it's the greatest thing ever. It's like hundreds of times better. I can't believe it took me 30 years to figure that out. When you say love your brain, how do you do that?
So when I first started looking at the brain in 1991, the week before I looked at mine, I looked at my mother's brain. And she was 60 at the time, and she had a stunningly beautiful brain, which just really reflected her life. She has 7 children. She was the Newport Beach Golf Club champion. She had a ton of friends. She was just, she is an awesome mother. And then I looked at mine. I was 37. It wasn't very healthy because I played football in high school. I had a lot of bad habits, like I wasn't sleeping. And I developed this concept called brain envy. I wanted her brain. And I often say Freud was wrong. He was about 2.5 feet too low in the body. Penis envy is not the cause of anybody's problem. You have to love your brain. And when you love it, everything changes. Like all of your decisions change, because brain health is basically 3 things. Brain envy, got to care about it. Nobody cares about their brain. Why? Because you can't see it. You can see the wrinkles in your skin or the fat around your belly, and you can do something when you're unhappy with it, because most people never look at their brain. They just don't care. And 1991, I'm a double board certified psychiatrist. I'm board certified in general psychiatry, child and adolescent psychiatry. It's the top neuroscience student in medical school. And I didn't care at all about my own brain. Like, I'm watching football every Sunday. It's like my favorite sport, which, obviously is a brain damaging sport. I just didn't care about it. But when I saw it, I'm like, oh no, we got to make this better. And so I think I've spent the last 32 years making my brain better and the brains of the people I serve.
Yeah, and your TED Talk, I think from about 9 years ago, you show a bunch of brain scans, and you show, I think, some really interesting things. Someone with dementia and someone with addiction or maybe even anxiety. And then you mentioned this fact, which kind of blew me away, saying that I think it was psychiatrists or psychologists or the only medical professionals that don't look at the organ they're treating. And it is pretty shocking. The fact that they don't bother looking at that most of the time, and that's the thing they're treating, and there's all these amazing tools and techniques. And I was wondering if you could speak on that and how that's affected your journey the last 10 plus years.
Well, and they call me crazy.
I'm sure.
I've been in a war with my colleagues.
Yeah.
Psychiatrists are indeed the only medical specialists that never look at the organ they treat. They make diagnoses based on symptom clusters with no biological data. Exactly how Abraham Lincoln was diagnosed with depression in 1840. And I'm not kidding when I say this. And it's part of the shit show that is psychiatry today. Last year, there were 337 million prescriptions for antidepressant medications, 60 million prescriptions for stimulants, most of those to children. And without no biological information, you tell me you're depressed, I'll give you Lexapro. And that's just nuts. So my own personal journey, when I started looking at the brain, I was so excited. I was like a little child. I'm like, I became a psychiatrist because my first wife tried to kill herself while I was in medical school, and I was horrified. Took her to see a wonderful psychiatrist, and I came to realize if he helped her, it wouldn't just help her, that ultimately it helped me, help our children and even our grandchildren, because they would be shaped by someone who was happier and more stable. So I fell in love with psychiatry. But before I went to medical school, I was an infantry medic. I was in the Army. And then I was an X-ray technician. And when I was an X-ray technician, our professors used to always say, how do you know unless you look? So as I became a psychiatrist, I'm like, why aren't we looking at the brain? I mean, obviously the brain is our organ. And so when I got the opportunity to do it, I'm really passionate about it. But then my colleague said, well, that's not what we do. That's not how you do this work. Well, I'm a middle child, and I was sort of a pain in the butt to my dad. And because you tell me I shouldn't do something, I'm like, well, why? If I get more information, I'm going to be a better doctor. And so for the first couple of years, I was pretty anxious going against the grain. And I think for many people to do something that's important, there's a story. So I was really anxious and upset. I feel caught. I want to be loved by my colleagues. I wanted to be, and yet I wanted to do the work I knew I was supposed to do. And 1995, my sister-in-law calls me up one night and tells me my 9-year-old nephew, Andrew, who's also my godson, attacked a little girl on the baseball field that day for no particular reason. And I'm like, it's 10 o'clock on a Tuesday night. I'm on the phone. I'm horrified because Andrew is also my godson. So he and I are really close. And I'm like, Sherry, what else is going on with him? And she said, Danny, he's different. He's mean. He doesn't smile anymore. I went into his room. Still makes me emotional. I went into his room today and I found 2 pictures that he had drawn. One of them, he was hanging from a tree in a suicide attempt. The other picture, he's shooting other children. So if you think about it now, Andrew is Columbine or Sandy Hook or Parkland, Florida, waiting to happen. And I'm like, I want to see him tomorrow. And because I'd already been scanning for 4 years, I'd already sort of associated violence to an area of the brain called the left temporal lobe. And when I saw him, I'm like, buddy, what's going on? And he said, Uncle Danny, I don't know. I'm just mad all the time. I'm like, is anybody teasing you? He said, no. Is anybody touching you in places they shouldn't be touching you? No. And so I scanned him, and I held his hand while he held his teddy bear while I got scanned. And it's the first time I saw it. I've seen it 100 times since. He was missing his left temporal lobe, that area that's often associated with violence. It turned out he had a cyst the size of a golf ball occupying the space of his left temporal lobe. And when the neurosurgeon drained it, his behavior completely went back to normal. And it was at that moment the war in my head started with my colleagues. I stopped being afraid and became a warrior. Because if you don't look, you don't know. The neurosurgeon said if I hadn't figured that out, Andrew would have been dead in 6 months. And this is personal, right? Not only from people in my own family who've suffered, but I'm a better doctor when I look at your brain. And you're a better patient because when you look at your brain, you like go, oh, I want that better, right? I mean, most rational people, they know your brain's involved in everything you do, how you think, how you feel, how you act, how you get along with other people. And if it's troubled, you're going to have trouble in your life. So if you see your brain and it's not healthy, you're more cooperative with me when we put you on a brain health program. So not a psychiatric treatment program. Nobody really wants that, but everybody wants a better brain. So I hate the term mental illness because it shames people. It's stigmatizing and it's wrong. These are brain health issues. And so when we reimagine mental health as brain health, everything changes, which means you got to eat better and you probably should supplement your brain. And you probably shouldn't let your children play tackle football or hit soccer balls with their head.
Yeah. Yeah. Language is everything, isn't it? And so also mental illness feels as if it's disempowering when I hear that. Like, I don't know what to do. And it seems like this weird thing that I can't get my hands around, but brain health is different. And so if I come to you, doc, and I'm like, all right, whatever, I'm not feeling good or I'm depressed or whatever, you would immediately scan my brain. And then you would probably start putting me on a protocol of what I ate, what I viewed, the sports I played if I was doing head injury stuff. And then you would also start getting me processing things differently with my brain. Is that kind of where you would start? There's a lot of things there.
So I take a really good history. When patients come to see us, they fill out about 25 pages of information. I mean, I really want to get to know you. And then I would scan you and I would test your brain. So we'll do some cognitive testing. And then I'll put all of that together. And I'm like, you're really awesome and accomplished and can be better. And what if at your level, I could help you be 10% more effective? I mean, that would be pretty cool. So I don't start with you're bipolar, you're schizophrenic, you have OCD. I generally start with you're awesome. How much more awesome can I help you be? And I always think of my patients in 4 big circles. It's okay. So how can I help the biology of your brain and body? Because I can't get your brain right if your body is unhealthy. And so I have a mnemonic we talk about called bright minds. You want to keep your brain healthy or rescue it. If it's headed for trouble, we have to prevent or treat the 11 major risk factors that steal your mind. So I assess all of those on my patients. So we're going to get the biology right, but you also have a psychology, or how you think, or what was it like growing up? What were the developmental traumas in your life? So I'm going to teach you how to kill the ants, the automatic negative thoughts that steal your happiness. We live in a society of undisciplined thinkers here in the US, probably in the UK. There's an ant infestation, the automatic negative thoughts that steal people's minds. There's a social circle, which is what's going on in your life and in the world, right? Just coming out of a pandemic, that was a huge social stressor. But also, what most psychiatrists would never talk about, there's a spiritual circle. Why the heck do you care? What's your deepest sense of meaning and purpose? It's your connection with God, with the planet, with the past, and with the future. And so what we know is that purposeful people live longer, they're healthier, and they're happier. And so I spend time with my patients on what is your sense of purpose? Why do you care about having a healthy brain?
Wow, very holistic. And you mentioned the traumas. I know you talked about this ACE test, where they kind of go back through these different types of traumas that people have had. And I think you'd said that if you identify a certain number, it can mean that your lifespan will be 20 years less than someone else. I wonder if you could speak a little bit out on how you identify traumas, how you can resolve them, and how they really do affect your longevity.
Well, I'm living in a family of trauma, So ACE, adverse childhood experiences. So the initial study was actually done by the CDC and Kaiser in Southern California. We looked at 17,000 people, and they gave them this ACE questionnaire, which is 10 questions, and they're all basically about childhood trauma: physical, sexual, emotional abuse, neglect, abandonment, divorce, incarceration, growing up with a parent who had a mental illness or a substance abuse problem. And so how many of these on a scale of 0 to 10? So I'm a 1. My wife is an 8. That she grew up in serious trauma with an uncle that was a heroin addict and lots of physical and emotional abuse. Both of my nieces, who I adopted, are 9s. And so if you score 4 or more, you have an increased risk of 7 of the top 10 leading causes of death, including cancer. If you score 6 or more, you die 20 years earlier. Now, my nieces and my wife are not going to die 20 years earlier because they've addressed the trauma and they live brain healthy lifestyles. And my wife wrote about this in her book, The Relentless Courage of a Scared Child. And one of the ways to address trauma, and all of them have had EMDR. It's a specific psychological treatment for trauma. I love it. It's, besides teaching people to not believe every stupid thing they think, to kill the ants, it's my favorite form of psychotherapy, where we'll have you bring up the traumas, catalog them, bring them up, but then get your eyes to move back and forth. That's why it's called EMDR, eye movement. And while you do, you feel the trauma, but then it tends to dissipate. And it's just very effective. But if you continue to drink while you're doing EMDR, it's sort of less effective.
Okay. So that's the way you deal with the traumas, ANT and EMDR, and obviously simultaneously working on the other circles, but those two are very effective for dealing with the trauma. What do you
Yes.
think? What do you think about some of these MDMA assisted therapies for people that have, for traumatized soldiers. I mean, I know you're not a fan of necessarily the substances, but they're trying to do a similar thing that maybe cannot be done with people with extreme trauma. What are your thoughts on something like that?
I'm very worried about it because, I've been a psychiatrist for 40 years. I've seen this party before. I have seen how opiates are innocuous. In fact, in the 90s, doctors were shamed if they didn't keep people out of pain, that pain was considered the fifth vital sign. And if someone was in pain, you needed to give them an opiate, and you see where that got us.
Yeah.
That wasn't good. Or that alcohol is a health food. Again, in the 90s. Our first clinic was right next to the Napa Valley in Northern California, and everyone's so excited. I have to have my 2 glasses of red wine a day, that is good for me. It's a complete lie. Or that, and we're in the middle of marijuana is innocuous. In fact, during the last presidential election, Vice President Biden, when he was asked about the federal government legalizing marijuana, he said, I think there still needs to be more study. And then Senator Cory Booker on national television shamed Biden and said, man, are you high? The answer is in. And Booker was wrong. The answer is not in. The answer is the opposite. The teenagers who use marijuana have an increased risk of anxiety, depression, and suicide. I published a study on 1,000 marijuana users. Every area of their brain is lower in activity. So now we're coming to psilocybin and ketamine, and I'm for anything safe that helps my patients suffer less. But let's not do those things that potentially you're going to have to do over and over again to maintain relief. Let's not do those until at least first we've gotten your diet right. Until first we've looked at your brain and know that we are in fact dealing with PTSD and not traumatic brain injury. I published 2 studies in 2015 showing we could separate with high levels of accuracy traumatic brain injury from post-traumatic stress disorder. So think physical trauma from emotional trauma. And Discover magazine listed my research as one of the top 100 stories in science for 2015. So I was really happy with that. In fact, sent it to all of my critics, at least everyone I could think of. But why is that important? Well, if you don't know what you're dealing with, how do you properly treat it? If you really think it's emotional trauma, then calming the brain is a really good idea. But what if it's the effect of traumatic brain injury? So many of these soldiers also had blast injuries, and they already have a low activity brain. What would happen if we decrease the activity in a low activity brain? It's you disinhibit people and you make them dramatically worse. So we're doing all of this. We're unleashing psilocybin on the population where we're not looking at their brains. And it's the first thing everybody wants. It's like, oh, mushrooms, will you prescribe those for me? And I'm like, not yet. Let's be thoughtful. And let's not think of it as the first thing to do. Let's think of it as maybe 12th or 13th on the list. And, just one example. I was a consultant on the movie Concussion with Will Smith. And you'll remember all the Oscar stuff about diversity, and Will Smith should have been nominated. I thought he was just awesome and amazing in that movie. Like, I'm a huge Will Smith fan. And right before the Oscars last year, I read his autobiography, and it was amazing. But at the end of the autobiography, he said he did ayahuasca 14 times. Well, Brian, it clearly didn't fix him, because on national television, he blew up his life. And, if these things fix people, one would think 14 times would be enough.
Yeah, that's an interesting statement. I mean, I had a very life-changing and powerful ayahuasca ceremony about 5 years ago. And I do think that, infrequent doses of some of these things can have beneficial effects, and they have. As far as with Will, I don't know. There's a lot of factors there. Let's just say that. But I understand your point of saying maybe fix the basics first. Obviously, if you're prescribing anything regularly to someone, that's not really a good sign. And so people that are just trying to get more and more things like psilocybin and marijuana to try to solve a problem, that doesn't seem like a good idea to me. But I will say, for me, some psychedelics have gotten me much further than other things haven't. So, yeah.
Well, I'm curious. I ask my patients, I do a series on Instagram called Scan My Brain. And Annalyn McCord, with the actress from 90210, was on, and she did a documentary on plant medicine. And like you, found it incredibly helpful, but her brain wasn't healthy. And so I'm caught because, as a doctor, my role is to decrease suffering. So I want to use anything that decreases suffering that doesn't potentially hurt you. And, with these things not having legality for very long, it's the side effects I worry about.
Yeah, I think for a lot of people, their alternatives are antidepressants, and we can go into big pharma next. Maybe a lot of them don't have access to some of your IP. They go to a therapist for 30 years, they don't get anywhere. And, they're stuck without having anything that can get them through or process certain things. So for me, it was pivotal and very important. But yeah, that's my experience. Let's talk about big pharma, and let's talk about some of these things you mentioned, like bipolar and ADHD and all these other things. I don't even know what those mean anymore. But clearly, prescriptions are being written left and right. And I know in America for children all the time. That hasn't hit the UK as much, but we're usually a few years behind. What don't you like about what's happening there? What needs to happen for that to be done intelligently? Or should they stop writing those prescriptions?
Well, I'm not a fan of the government telling doctors what to do. That sort of happened during the pandemic, and it was not good, right? Suppressing free speech is a bad idea.
I agree.
From my perspective, it's a shit show. 85% of psychiatric drugs are prescribed by non-psychiatric healthcare professionals in 10-minute office visits. So if you just start with that, you realize this is going to be trouble. Because, people who are not experts in these medications are prescribing them like candy. And in the early 90s, even psychiatric visits, when I was trained, I'd see my patients for an hour or two a week. And then managed care took over medicine, and they relegated psychiatrists to be the prescribers. And all of a sudden, I find myself being pushed to do 15-minute med checks. Now, I decided, no, that's not me. But that's what's happening wholesale in the United States. So I think stopping that practice of being the prescriber and being the whole person doctor, like many of us, at least in the 70s and 80s, were trained, is a more rational approach.
To continue watching the rest of the episode for free, visit our website londonreal.tv or click the link in the description below.
So Jim Rickards has just recorded a video that's not available to anyone in the public, and he's going to be talking about how this upcoming recession is going to be fast, it's going to be bloody, it's going to be nasty. But at the same time, he's going to show you how you can position yourself to profit from all of this chaos. Now, we've made this video only available to our viewers. Go to londonreal.tv/Jim. Watch that immediately. I can't say enough good things about Jim Rickards. He understands the global economic system better than any guest I've ever had on London Real. His predictions are almost uncannily true, and you can learn how to profit from his vision, from his expertise, and his understanding of economics. So go to londonreal.tv/Jim or click the link below. It's an excellent, excellent look on what's going to happen in the future and how you can position yourself to profit from that. Jim is one of the best in the business, one of my favorite guests on London Real. And he's very, very good at predicting the future and showing us all to profit from it. So click the link, and I hope you enjoy. Hey, it's Brian Rose, founder of the DeFi Academy. I've told you my 4-week crypto bootcamp is amazing, but don't take my word for it. This is what my students are saying.
The DeFi Academy was an amazing experience for me. It took me totally out of my comfort zone.
In this course, I was challenged, I was held accountable, and pushed to do things that honestly weren't always easy.
It's been phenomenal, and I can't believe we're already up on our 4 weeks. It has flown by.
Going through this DeFi accelerator by far was one of the best courses I've taken.
You do this course, you really get into the nitty-gritty of the activities that will make you comfortable with decentralized finance.
Thank you so much to Brian and everyone at London Real and the DeFi Academy for even putting together an amazing course like this.
Anybody else that wants to do it, please sign up. It is well worth the money.